There is a tightness in your chest that you have been trying to ignore. Your thoughts race from one worst-case scenario to the next, and somewhere between the racing and the checking, you have started measuring everything, counting what remains, watching what could disappear. The fear feels less like a feeling and more like a fact, a genuine report about the world you are living in. And the harder you look for evidence that things will be fine, the more evidence arrives that they will not be. This is not weakness. This is not failure. But something is happening to you that goes far deeper than worry, and it is costing you more than you realize. The story most people carry is simple. Fear is uncomfortable, but it is survivable. You feel it, you push through it, you keep moving, and eventually the circumstances change and the fear lifts. Under this belief, fear is just weather, something to tolerate while you wait for the sky to clear. What never gets examined is what the fear is doing to you while you endure it. The assumption is that your perception stays intact, that your judgment remains clear, that your actions are still rational even when your nervous system is screaming. But fear is not merely a feeling that rides alongside your decisions, it is a state. And when you enter it, everything you see, choose, and build begins to change. Wallace Wattles, writing at the turn of the 20th century, built his entire framework around a specific understanding of how wealth moves into a person's life. For Wattles, wealth did not arrive through grinding or luck or position. It arrived through a creative process, one that required faith, gratitude, and action performed in a particular way. These three elements were not decorations on a strategy, they were the actual mechanism. Faith held the mind steady on a definite thought. Gratitude kept the person in living contact with the source of all supply. Efficient action translated inner state into outer movement. Fear, when it enters, does not merely inconvenience these three elements, it breaks them. It shatters faith, kills gratitude, and turns action into desperation. If you want wealth to flow, Wattles said, you must live in the state that allows it to flow, and fear is the exact opposite of that state. This video is going to walk you through Wattles' method for escaping the fear state and returning to the creative state where wealth can actually move. Not suppression, not performance, not forcing yourself to smile through panic, but a genuine exit from the inner condition that closes channels and contracts the world around you. There is something worth sitting with before we begin, however. It is possible, perhaps even likely, that you have been trying to receive more, trying to build more, trying to call wealth into your life, all while living inside the very state that makes its movement impossible. The method exists. The door is real. But first, you need to understand exactly what you are trying to leave. Financial fear has a particular texture. It is not the fear of a single event, a deadline or a bill, though those may be its triggers. It is a background condition, a low hum beneath every decision, every purchase, every conversation about money. You wake into it before your eyes are fully open. You feel it in the way you check your bank account, in the small involuntary tightening that happens when your phone shows a notification from a number you do not recognize. It is not dramatic most of the time. It is quiet, and that quietness makes it worse because it becomes indistinguishable from simply being awake. Alongside the fear of not having enough runs, a second fear that rarely gets named clearly. The fear of missing something. A window that will not stay open. An opportunity moving past while you are still calculating whether to act. This fear drives a certain frantic attentiveness, a constant scanning of the environment for signals, for edges, for the thing that might change everything if only you see it in time. The scanning feels productive, it feels like preparation, but it is powered by anxiety, and anxiety makes the scan unreliable because you are not looking with clarity, you are looking with desperation. Then there is the fear that works in the opposite direction, the one that grips what little exists and refuses to release it. If something is already in your hands, even if it is small, the fear of losing it can become paralyzing. Decisions that should be made clearly get clouded by this gripping. You stay with something that no longer serves you, because the uncertainty of releasing it feels more dangerous than the certainty of staying. The fear of loss is quieter than the fear of not having, but it may be more damaging because it keeps you locked into positions you should have left long ago. Underneath all of these variations is the fear of acting wrong, of choosing the wrong direction, of making the move that turns out to be the mistake. This fear does not produce stillness. It produces a kind of frantic passivity where you are constantly in motion, but none of the motion is clean. You begin and stop. You plan and revise. You prepare and then prepare again, because preparation feels safer than the exposure of actual movement. All four of these fears, the fear of not having, the fear of missing, the fear of losing, and the fear of acting wrong, are not separate problems. They are faces of a single state, and that state is governing your life. When a person senses that fear is slowing them down, the first instinct is to force through it, act harder, move faster, produce more. The logic seems sound on the surface. If fear is pulling you back, then willpower must push you forward. So you increase your output, make more calls, send more messages, pursue more angles, working with a kind of urgency that looks like hustle, but is really panic wearing a schedule. The trouble is that forced action carries the signature of the state that generated it. Action born from fear delivers fear-shaped results. Others respond to the fear state not by forcing outward, but by hoarding inward, pulling energy back, becoming more selective, more controlled, more rigid. They stop giving freely because giving feels dangerous when there is not enough. They stop taking risks because risk from inside the fear state looks only like exposure. This hoarding feels responsible. It feels like self-preservation. But it is the fear narrowing the channel, not wisdom protecting the supply. There is also the compulsive checking, refreshing the account, reading the news again, watching the numbers. Each check is a small attempt to manage anxiety by gathering information, as though certainty could be produced by monitoring. The checking never satisfies because fear is not fed by data. It feeds on the act of searching. Every time you check and find the same concerning picture you already knew was there, the state deepens rather than resolves, because you have just confirmed once again that your attention belongs to the problem. Some people discover the language of manifestation and try to import it directly into the fear state without ever leaving it. They repeat affirmations while their stomach is clenched. They visualize abundance while their mind is actually running calculations about debt. They say, "I am grateful," without actually touching gratitude. And then they quietly wonder why nothing changes. The problem is not the practice. The practice, as Wattles understood it, is genuinely powerful. The problem is the state it is being practiced inside. You cannot think creative thoughts from inside a competing consciousness. And perhaps the cruelest disguise of all is the one where the person calls their fear caution, dresses their panic in the language of prudence, and convinces themselves that their anxiety is actually wisdom keeping them safe. The first thing fear takes from you is your attention. When the fear state is active, your field of perception narrows. What was once a wide landscape becomes a small, sharp view of the threat. Psychologists call this tunnel vision, but it is more than a visual metaphor. Every form of attention narrows, including your ability to notice opportunity, to hear someone's offer clearly, to recognize a connection that could change things. The channel through which new information reaches you physically contracts. You are not seeing less because there is less to see. You are seeing less because the state you are in has closed the aperture. Gratitude cannot survive inside the fear state. This is not a moral statement, it is a functional one. Gratitude requires a genuine orientation toward what exists, toward what is already present and moving and alive in your life. Fear points only at what is absent, what is threatened, what is at risk of disappearing. These two orientations cannot occupy the same moment. When you are inside fear, gratitude is not merely difficult, it is structurally impossible, because the fear state is built from the perception of lack, and genuine gratitude is built from the recognition of abundance. One of them must be wrong. Inside the fear state, the mind always chooses lack. What happens to action under fear is perhaps the most practically damaging of all. Action performed from the creative state is efficient, present, and directed. Action performed from fear is either frantic or paralyzed. The frantic version is driven by the need to escape the anxiety rather than by clear perception of what actually needs to be done. It is exhausting to watch because it is exhausting to live. A person in this state moves constantly without ever arriving anywhere because they are not moving towards something, they are moving away from the feeling. And the paralyzed version is no better, because at least the frantic version generates some data. Paralysis generates only more time inside the locked room. When channels remain invisible, supply cannot flow through them. A channel, in Wattles' understanding, is not always a grand structure. It can be a conversation, a recognition, a relationship, an opening in an existing situation that was not visible before. These channels become invisible when fear has narrowed your perception. The person who could have connected you moves through your life, and you are too contracted to notice. The idea that could have shifted everything arrives as a quiet thought and gets buried under the noise of the fear state. The supply is not absent. The river is still flowing. But from inside the locked room you cannot see the door, and so you do not know that escape is possible. Wealth, as Wattles understood it, does not flow to the most frightened or the most desperate or the most urgent. It flows through a particular inner condition, one characterized by faith in the source, by genuine gratitude for what exists, and by action that is clean, efficient, and free from the contamination of panic. This is not a philosophical nicety. It is a functional description of how the creative process actually works. A different state is required, and the fear state is not a variation of that different state, it is its opposite. The reason affirmations fail inside the fear state is not that the words are wrong. The words may be exactly right. The reason is that the state around the words cancels them before they can take root. Fear is a total environment, not merely a thought. It changes the quality of everything inside it. Pouring positive statements into a mind operating from fear is like trying to light a fire in the rain without addressing the rain. The flame will not hold until the environment changes. This means the primary task is not to find better affirmations, better strategies, better actions. The primary task is to leave the state, to exit, to escape, not through distraction or suppression, but through a genuine return to the inner condition from which creative thought and efficient action can actually emerge. This is Wattles' method, and it is radical precisely because it demands something most people are afraid to do: let go of fear before the evidence suggests it is safe to do so. The next section will explain exactly why this works and what the law behind it actually is. But before that explanation can land with full weight, it is worth sitting with something uncomfortable. The fear state may feel like the most honest response to your current circumstances. It may feel like the only responsible way to face what is actually happening in your finances, your life, and your future. That feeling is the last defense of the locked room, and it is wrong. Wattles' fundamental teaching rests on a single foundational idea. There is a thinking stuff from which all things are made. This is not poetry. For Wattles, this was a working principle, as operational as gravity. This thinking stuff permeates all existing forms and all of space. A thought held in this stuff causes the form of that thought to be created. The universe is not indifferent to consciousness. It is responsive to it. Creative thought, genuinely held, begins a movement in the substance of things, a movement toward the form of what was thought. Wealth in this framework is not produced only by physical labor or cleverness. It flows from creative consciousness, expressing through a person who has aligned their inner state with the creative process itself. Faith, in this context, is not religion, and it is not blind optimism. Faith is the mental posture of holding a definite thought without allowing doubt to dissolve it. It is the steady refusal to let appearances override the creative intention. Wattles was clear that faith is not something you feel when things are going well. It is something you practice, especially when they are not. The ability to hold a thought clearly and steadily against the pressure of unfavorable evidence is what faith actually means in the Wattles framework. Without it, the creative process cannot begin, because a definite thought that keeps collapsing into uncertainty does not hold long enough in the thinking stuff to generate movement. Gratitude performs a specific function in this system. It is not simply a pleasant feeling to cultivate. Wattles described gratitude as the force that keeps the person in living connection with the source of all supply. When you are genuinely grateful, you are oriented toward abundance, toward what exists, toward the flow of good that has already moved through your life. This orientation opens something in the relationship between the person and the source. Gratitude is the working acknowledgement that supply has come before and will come again. Without gratitude, a kind of spiritual isolation develops. The person becomes disconnected from the very current they are trying to receive from. Efficient action completes the triangle. Wattles did not teach passive contemplation. He taught that inner state must express itself through present action, action done in the full manner with every resource available, action given completely in the present moment without holding back for a future opportunity. The efficient action is not the frantic, desperate movement of fear. It is the clean, directed, fully present movement of someone who is not running from something, but advancing toward something. Each of these three elements, faith, gratitude, and efficient action, depends on the others. They form a living circuit, and each one requires a particular inner state to function. Fear interrupts this circuit at every point simultaneously. It destroys faith by making appearances seem more real than possibility. It kills gratitude by turning attention toward what is absent. It corrupts action by replacing direction with desperation. When fear enters, the creative process does not merely slow down. It halts. The channel closes, not because supply has disappeared, but because the inner condition required to receive it has been replaced by its opposite. This is the hidden cost that no fear management strategy has ever honestly confronted. Fear does not merely make wealth harder to attract. It actively stops the mechanism through which wealth flows. Wattles did not write for people who had no problems. He wrote from experience of poverty and struggle, and he wrote for people in the middle of real material difficulty. His teaching was not the cheerful optimism of someone who has never felt the ground shift beneath them. It was the hard-won principle of someone who had tested the mechanism and found that it worked only when practiced with complete commitment. From that position, he was unambiguous. The competitive mind, the mind that measures against others and scrambles for limited pieces, could not access the creative current. And fear, by its very nature, drives the mind into competition, into the logic of scarcity, into the fight for a shrinking share. His method was built around thinking truth, not comfortable truth, not pleasant truth. Actual truth, the truth of the underlying creative reality, regardless of what present circumstances appear to show. A person could be looking at empty accounts and still hold the truth of abundance in their mind if they understood what Wattles meant by truth. The truth was not that money was currently present. The truth was that the thinking stuff was inexhaustibly creative, that the source was not depleted, that the channel was closable, but the river was not. Holding this truth was not self-delusion. It was alignment with the actual nature of reality, as Wattles understood it. Creating, rather than competing, was the foundational distinction of Wattles' method. Competing meant fighting for what already existed, squeezing for a larger share of a fixed supply. Creating meant bringing something new into existence through the creative process, calling something out of the thinking stuff by holding its form steadily in mind and then acting efficiently in the present moment. These are not the same activity. One emerges from abundance, the other emerges from scarcity. One opens channels, the other fights over the ones that already exist, and the mental state required for each is entirely different. You cannot create from inside a competing consciousness, because competing consciousness is built on the premise that there is not enough, and that premise closes the creative aperture completely. Fear is the primary engine of the competing mind. When you are afraid, you instinctively shift into the mode of fighting for scraps. You begin measuring what others have, and you do not. You begin calculating your disadvantages, your late start, your limited resources. The lens that fear installs sees a world of fixed supply and too many people reaching for it. From inside that lens, Wattles' teaching seems naive, even irresponsible. But the lens itself is the problem. It is not showing you reality. It is showing you the distorted picture that the fear state always produces. Wattles asked his readers to do something that required genuine courage, to see past the appearance of competition into the reality of creation, to hold the perspective of abundance, even while the ledger showed deficit. Not to lie about the deficit, but to refuse to make the deficit the final word about the nature of supply. This was the act of faith he demanded. Not belief without evidence, but the willingness to hold a deeper truth against a shallower picture. Fear makes this act feel impossible. The creative state makes it feel natural. A significant number of people who encounter this teaching immediately misread the invitation to escape fear as a command to suppress it, to perform positivity, to paste a smile over genuine distress and pretend that the concern is not there. This is not what Wattles meant, and it is not what this method requires. Suppression and escape are entirely different operations. Suppression means hiding the fear while continuing to live inside the state it creates. Escape means genuinely leaving the state and returning to a different one. Suppression costs energy and eventually fails. Escape is permanent in the sense that it can be repeated whenever necessary. The fear state can be acknowledged clearly and honestly without obeying it. This distinction is important enough to repeat in different terms. You can name what you feel without letting what you feel become your governing authority. The fear can be seen, spoken, and understood without becoming the lens through which all decisions are made. Acknowledging the fear is not the same as surrendering your creative orientation to it. Recognition is the first step of escape, not a confirmation that the fear is right. Escaping fear is also not a pretense that danger does not exist. Genuine material difficulties are real. Wattles never asked his readers to deny their circumstances. He asked them to refuse to let their circumstances become their entire inner world. The difference between a person inside the fear state and a person in the creative state is not that one has problems and the other does not. The difference is where each person's mind is oriented. The fearful person is oriented toward the problem as the ultimate reality. The creative person is oriented toward the source as the ultimate reality, while remaining fully aware of the problem and acting efficiently in response to it. What escaping fear actually means in the Wattles method is returning to the creative state. It is a movement back to faith, back to gratitude, back to clear and efficient action. It is choosing source over appearances, not because appearances are irrelevant, but because appearances are not the deepest level of what is real. The thinking stuff is deeper. The creative potential is deeper. The river that flows beneath the locked room is deeper than the walls that seem to contain you. Choosing that depth over the surface of frightening appearances is not denial. It is a return to the actual operating reality of the creative process. Shallow advice about fear often says, feel the fear and do it anyway. This approach, while better than paralysis, still carries the contamination of the state. Wattles was pointing at something more thorough. Do not merely act despite the fear. Change the state from which the action comes. The action that emerges from the creative state is not the same action as the one that pushes through fear. It has different quality, different direction, different relationship to the source. The how matters as much as the whether. Fear stops flow by performing two operations simultaneously. First, it closes your attention inward and backward, toward problems, toward lack, toward what might be lost. This closure removes you from the present moment where all efficient action lives, and it seals your perception against the channels through which supply could arrive. A channel that your fear-contracted perception cannot see is, for all practical purposes, a channel that does not exist for you. The contraction is real, the blindness is real, and its consequences are entirely material. Second, fear severs the relationship to source that Wattles described as the foundation of all wealth movement. Gratitude, which is the practical expression of that relationship, cannot be maintained when the mind is oriented entirely toward what is absent, threatened, or at risk. And without gratitude, the living connection to the flow weakens. This is not mystical consequence. It is the natural result of the fact that you cannot hold two opposing orientations with equal force at the same time. Fear presses so hard toward lack that the orientation toward abundance cannot hold its ground. When the state changes, something extraordinary begins. Perception opens again. The same environment that seemed to hold only problems begins to reveal possibilities that were always present but invisible. Conversations you would have dismissed as irrelevant begin to carry weight. Intuitions that the fear state would have drowned out begin to surface. Channels that were there all along become visible. This is not magic. It is what happens when the aperture of attention reopens after contraction. The supply did not disappear. The view of it did. Wealth moves through open channels. This is the mechanics beneath the metaphor. An open channel is not a mystic construct. It is a relationship, a conversation, an idea, a perception, a movement of attention towards something that can actually carry supply. These channels exist everywhere. The river of formless substance, as Wattles described it, is inexhaustible, always moving, always creative. What determines whether supply reaches you is not the volume of the river. It is the state of the channel through which you are able to receive. And the state of that channel is determined above all by your inner state. Fear contracts it. The creative state opens it. This is the law behind the promise, and this is why escape is not optional if flow is what you want. The first step in the mechanism is recognition. Before any state can be changed, it must be seen clearly for what it is. Fear, when it is ruling your inner world, tends to be invisible because it masquerades as reality. It presents itself not as a state you are in, but as a clear report of the facts. The fear does not announce itself as fear. It announces itself as an accurate description of your situation, and that is precisely what makes it so difficult to leave. The first movement of escape is the act of naming the state clearly. This is the fear state. Not these are the facts. Not this is reality. This is a state I am currently living inside. The second step is stopping the obedience. The fear state issues commands. It tells you to check again, to contract, to hoard, to act from urgency, to interpret everything through the lens of threat. These commands feel compelling. They feel like rational responses to real information, but they are instructions from the state, not from clear perception. Stopping the obedience does not mean arguing with every fearful thought. It means withdrawing the automatic compliance that makes fear feel like authority. You do not have to believe the fear just because it is loud. Re-entering gratitude is the third step, and it is perhaps the most operationally powerful. Genuine gratitude, even for small things, for what already exists, for what has already arrived, for what is real and present and alive in your life right now, physically changes the orientation of the mind. It moves attention from absence to presence, from what is threatened to what is real, from the future worst case to the current actual. Wattles understood gratitude not as an emotion to perform, but as a discipline of attention. Directing attention toward what exists, rather than what is missing, is both the act and the result of gratitude. Restoring definite thought is the fourth step. The fear state dissolves clarity. It replaces definite direction with generalized dread. Returning to a specific, clear, creative intention, not a wish, not a vague hope, but a definite thought about what you intend to create, is an act of will that begins to move the thinking stuff again. This thought does not need to be elaborate. It needs to be clear and genuinely held. Wattles was emphatic that the definiteness of the thought mattered enormously. Vague desire does not hold form in the thinking stuff. Clear intention does. The fifth step is taking efficient present action. Not eventually, not after everything feels better, not after the fear has completely subsided, but now. Present action, taken from even a partial return to the creative state, begins to move something. It creates contact with the world. It demonstrates, to your own nervous system as much as to the environment, that you are no longer imprisoned in the locked room. The action does not need to be large. It needs to be clean, done with full attention, given completely in this moment, without the contamination of panic or the hedging of fear. The sixth step, and it completes the circuit, is the refusal to return to competition. Competition, in Wattles' language, is the mental posture of measuring against others and scrambling for a limited supply. This posture is fear's natural political expression. When you refuse competition, you are declaring that your supply does not depend on someone else's diminishment. There is enough. The source is inexhaustible. Your work is to stay in the creative state where that supply can flow toward you, not to fight others for a fixed portion of what currently exists. Holding this refusal against the pressure of apparent scarcity is the sustained practice that keeps the channel open. Something shifts the moment the state begins to change. Before any visible outcome appears, before a single dollar moves or a single opportunity arrives, the quality of your attention changes. A mind inside the creative state does not see the world the same way a mind inside the fear state sees it. The environment has not been altered, the circumstances are identical, and yet the person perceives differently, because perception is not a neutral recording of facts. It is a function of the state generating it. A different state produces a different quality of seeing. With perception restored, options become visible that were previously invisible. This is not a metaphor about positivity. Options are genuinely available in most environments that a contracted, fear-narrowed attention cannot detect. The gap in a conversation that could have been filled with a meaningful offer. The connection between two things that a more expansive attention would recognize as significant. The moment in someone's situation where your particular knowledge could open a door. These are real, present things. They do not appear magically after the state changes. They were always there. The fear state simply made it impossible to see them. When options become visible, they invite action. This is the third movement in the invisible sequence. Not forced action, not frantic action, but the natural movement of a person who has seen something real and knows what to do with it. This action is qualitatively different from fear-driven action. It is not escaping something. It is moving towards something. The difference in energy is palpable, not only to the person acting but to everyone they interact with. People respond differently to someone acting from clarity than to someone acting from desperation. The reception is different, the effect is different, and the results are different. Action creates contact. Every efficient, present, clearly directed action puts the person in genuine contact with the world, with other people, with situations, with circumstances that can carry supply. This contact is the practical expression of what Wattles meant by working through channels. You are not passive. You are not simply visualizing and waiting. You are moving through the world from the creative state, making contact, creating the connections that allow the supply to reach you. Contact opens channels. A channel is made real by contact. A conversation that happens is a channel. A relationship that deepens is a channel. An idea that is recognized and acted upon is a channel. None of these exist in the abstract. They exist because a person in a particular state moved into a particular situation at a particular time and perceived what was there clearly enough to respond to it fully. The creative state does not create these channels out of nothing. It opens the person to the channels that are already present and waiting. Channels carry supply. Once a channel is open, the thinking stuff, the formless creative substance, moves through it in whatever form the situation allows. Supply reaches the person through the actual material structures of their life, through work, through relationships, through opportunities, through ideas, through the accumulated movement of 100 small, efficient actions that together build a current. The supply was never absent from the river. The question was always whether the channel was open enough to receive it. When enough channels open and enough supply moves through them, the person who has been practicing the escape from fear begins to experience what feels like flow restored. Not the sudden arrival of wealth from nowhere, but the steady movement of creative life. The sense that things are moving again, that good is arriving, that the source is expressing itself through the channels that the creative state has kept open. This is the restored flow. This is what Wattles described as living in the certain way. And it begins not with better circumstances, but with the escape from the state that was making the channels invisible. The most common interruption is returning to panic after the state has partially shifted. The creative state requires maintenance. It is not a single achievement that permanently resolves the fear. Old patterns, deep patterns, patterns reinforced by years of financial anxiety will reassert themselves. The mind drifts back. The stomach tightens again. The familiar scanning returns. Each time this happens without recognition, the channel narrows again. Interruption is not failure, but it must be caught early, because the longer the mind spends back inside the fear state, the harder the next escape becomes. Checking lack repeatedly is its own form of interruption, even when it disguises itself as responsible monitoring. Every time you open the account and feel the familiar contraction, every time you inventory what is absent, and let that inventory define your inner state, you are feeding the condition you are trying to leave. This is one of the most honest challenges of this practice, because checking feels necessary, even virtuous. Real information matters, But there is a difference between clear-eyed awareness of your current situation and obsessive monitoring driven by anxiety. The first is compatible with the creative state. The second is inseparable from the fear state. Speaking fear out loud, reinforcing it through language, strengthening it through repetition in conversation, is a particularly effective way to interrupt the flow because it brings other people into the fear state with you. Words are not neutral. When fear is spoken habitually, it becomes the architecture of your communication. Every conversation becomes a confirmation of lack, a rehearsal of worry, a shared reinforcement of the closed state. The people around you reflect this back, the world seems to confirm it, and the state deepens. Thought discipline includes language discipline. What you consistently speak, you consistently inhabit. Acting from urgency, even once, from inside the fear state that has begun to creep back, re-anchors the nervous system in the pattern you were escaping. Urgency has a particular flavor. It is the compressed need to resolve anxiety through action, not to advance through clear intention. When a decision is made because you cannot stand the tension any longer, rather than because clear perception has indicated the right move, the action will carry that contamination. The results will reflect it. And more importantly, the state will be reinforced, because urgency-driven action confirms to your mind that fear was the appropriate response. Comparing with others returns the mind immediately to the competing consciousness that Wattles identified as the enemy of the creative process. When you begin measuring your progress against someone else's, your timeline against theirs, your apparent circumstances against their visible success, you have re-entered the framework of scarcity. Someone else's advancement begins to feel like a subtraction from your own. The river of supply starts to look finite again. The creative current becomes inaccessible because the mind is now operating from the premise that there is not enough for everyone, and that premise is the foundation of the fear state. Perhaps the most insidious interruption of all is calling fear realism. The mind, when sophisticated, will dress the fear state in intellectual clothing and present it as clear-eyed assessment of real conditions. This is where the fear state becomes almost impenetrable because it has convinced you that leaving it would be naive. The person who calls their panic prudence, who calls their contraction caution, who calls their closed channel responsible conservatism, has found the most elegant way to stay locked in the room while believing they are simply being honest about the view from the window. Imagine a room with no natural light and a single small window set high in the wall. From inside this room, your entire understanding of the world is formed by what passes through that window. You can see a narrow strip of sky. Sometimes it is dark. Sometimes you see weather. Occasionally something moves past the glass that gives you hope. This is the fear state. The window is real. The information coming through it is real, but the window is not the world. The world is vastly larger than what that small aperture can show, and the room itself, the walls that define your world, is not reality. It is a state. What the person inside the room eventually begins to believe is that the window is all there is. The walls become so familiar that they stop being noticed as walls. The limitation becomes the norm, and from inside the room, the window does show things that are genuinely concerning. There is real weather out there, real storms, real uncertainty. So the fear the room generates does not feel irrational. It feels like the only honest response to what the window is showing. The room in this way justifies itself. The state maintains itself by making its distortions feel like accuracy. But outside the room, the river is still flowing. The river of creative substance, of formless supply, of the wealth that Wattles described as inexhaustible, has not dried up because you moved into the room. It does not know the room exists. It continues its movement through the open landscape of reality, through channels, through relationships, through opportunities, through the creative actions of people who are not confined by that particular four walls. The supply did not leave. The closed state made the supply invisible and unreachable, but the supply is entirely intact. Escaping the fear state, in the deepest Wattles understanding, is not the act of creating the river. The river already exists. It has always existed. Escaping fear is the act of leaving the room, of finding the door, of walking through it, of returning to the landscape where the river can be seen, felt, and moved toward. This is why the escape cannot be accomplished by decorating the walls. Hanging better pictures inside the room does not change the fundamental condition. The room is still the room. The window is still the window. The river is still invisible. Only leaving the room changes the relationship to the river. The door to the room is not locked from the outside. It was never locked from the outside. It is held shut by the hand of the person inside, who is gripping the handle tightly, because the room, for all its confinement, feels familiar and predictable and safe in a way the open landscape does not. The act of escaping fear is the act of releasing the handle, of choosing the uncertainty of the open river over the certainty of the closed room. This is not easy. The open landscape is genuine exposure. But exposure to the river is infinitely preferable to the safety of a room where nothing can reach you, including supply. The moments after leaving the room are often disorienting. The spaciousness feels strange after the confinement. The river sounds louder than the room made it seem possible. Gratitude floods in naturally because the contrast is overwhelming. And in that state, in that openness, with the river audible and the sky unobstructed, the creative process resumes. Definite thought holds. Efficient action moves. Channels become visible and then become real. This is the return to flow, not the creation of something new, but the restoration of the relationship to something that was always there, waiting for the door to open. The river is still there. It has always been there. The question is only whether you are in the room or outside it. And the answer to that question is entirely and always yours. At a certain point, fear stops being something you experience and becomes something you experience through. This is the crossing of a critical threshold. On one side, fear is a response, something that arises in difficult moments and passes when the moment shifts. On the other side, fear is a lens, a permanent filter through which all incoming experience is processed. Most people who have lived with financial anxiety for long enough have crossed this threshold without noticing. They do not only feel fear, they have begun to see with it. When fear becomes the interpreter of life, every piece of information gets processed through its assumptions. Good news gets filtered for what might go wrong. New opportunities are seen primarily in terms of their risks. Relationships are read for signs of potential loss. The body stays in a low-grade state of readiness, as though the emergency has never fully resolved, because inside this framing, the emergency never does fully resolve. There is always the next threat waiting just beyond the current one. The fear as interpreter state is exhausting in a particular way. It is not the exhaustion of doing too much. It is the exhaustion of seeing threat in everything. This is the blocker that no affirmation can reach. You cannot override a lens with a word. The lens processes the word and renders it safe or unsafe, believable or naive, helpful or irresponsible, based on its own governing logic. Fear as interpreter becomes a self-sustaining system. It needs no encouragement from outside. It generates its own fuel from ordinary experience, and it does so invisibly, because the person living inside it experiences the fear-shaped world as simply the world, not as a constructed view, but as accurate perception of what is actually there. The most reliable disguise fear uses is the language of realism. When the fear state has become sufficiently integrated into identity, it stops presenting itself as emotional. It presents itself as clear-eyed, evidence-based, rational assessment of genuine conditions. When a person in this state is encouraged to return to the creative orientation, to hold gratitude, to choose source over appearances, the disguised fear answers immediately. This is just reality. Things actually are this serious. Pretending otherwise is not spiritual practice. It is self-deception. This voice sounds like the voice of clarity. It is not. It is the voice of the locked room insisting that the window is the world. A second disguise is the urgency imperative. I have to be anxious because things are serious. The severity of the situation is treated as a direct justification for the fear state, as though the depth of a problem determines the appropriate inner response to it. This feels correct. It feels like matching your emotional register to the scale of what is at stake. But Wattles showed that the inner state that produces the best response to a serious situation is not the most alarmed state. It is the most creative one. Panic about a serious problem does not improve the quality of the solution. It degrades it. Then there is the safety claim. Fear keeps me safe. Fear is my warning system. Without it, I would miss the signs of real danger and make reckless decisions. There is a kernel of truth here that makes the disguise effective. Genuine acute fear in response to genuine acute danger has its function. But the chronic fear state, the permanent background anxiety that governs daily perception and decision-making, is not that warning system. It is what happens when the warning system gets stuck in the on position and begins generating alerts about everything, including the opening of doors that should be walked through. The most psychologically sophisticated disguise is the loss protection argument. If I relax, I will lose what little I have. This one is difficult to challenge because it rests on a real emotional history. Losses have happened. Relaxation has preceded some of them. The mind draws a line of causation that feels earned. But the line is false. Loss was not caused by the relaxation of vigilance. It was the result of conditions that the fear state could not have prevented, regardless of its intensity. The fear state has never actually protected supply. It has only made the person believe that their anxiety was the thing standing between them and catastrophe. Underneath all these disguises, fear operates as a false ruler, a usurper of the authority that belongs to the creative state. It issues its commands through the language of prudence, realism, protection, and necessity, and it collects compliance through the threat of worse outcomes if its authority is questioned. Recognizing this, seeing the fear clearly for the governing system it has become rather than the honest assessment it pretends to be, is not a comfortable moment. But it is the beginning of genuine escape, because you cannot leave a prison you believe is not a prison. The openings that the fear state makes invisible are not small consolations. They are often the exact things that would shift the trajectory, the conversation that needed to happen, the offer that was there to be made, the moment in a relationship where trust could have deepened into something that carried supply. The fear state either generates the wrong energy to take those openings or makes them impossible to see in the first place. The person living inside the fear state is not missing opportunities because they are unlucky or unworthy. They are missing them because the state they are in has physically narrowed the aperture of perception that would reveal them. When action does come, it often comes either too late or too hard. Too late because paralysis was mistaken for patience, and the window that had been available closed while the fear was still being processed. Too hard because when urgency finally breaks through paralysis, it arrives with the full force of the compressed anxiety behind it, and the action that results is overdetermined, overstated, or aggressive in ways that damage the very channels it was trying to open. Fear-driven action, even when it finally moves, carries the signature of the state that generated it, and other people sense that signature without always being able to name it. Gratitude's disappearance is both a consequence and a deepening cause. When the fear state maintains its grip long enough, the genuine experience of gratitude becomes increasingly inaccessible. Not merely difficult, but genuinely distant. The orientation toward what exists weakens as the orientation toward what is threatened strengthens. This is not a moral failure, it is the natural perceptual outcome of prolonged fear. But the consequence is severe. Without gratitude, the living connection to the source that Wattles described weakens. The spiritual and creative current becomes thinner. The sense of being held, supported, and resourced by a reality larger than the current problem, which is the psychological foundation of faith, begins to erode. Wealth flow, as a result of all of this, appears blocked. From inside the fear state, the blockage feels external. It looks like circumstance, timing, bad luck, the economy, other people's advantages, or the arbitrary unfairness of the universe. The locked room is so complete that its walls look like the world. The person genuinely believes the river has dried up because from where they are standing they cannot see the river at all. They press harder against the walls. They look more desperately through the window. They double their urgency and their monitoring, all of which deepens the state. The river has not dried up, but the fear state has made that truth impossible to verify from the inside. The pattern begins to break at the moment of recognition. Not the recognition of fear as a feeling, but the recognition of fear as a state you are currently inhabiting. There is a specific shift in perspective when this recognition arrives. The person moves from being inside the fear to being aware of the fear. Even a brief moment of that awareness creates distance between the person and the state. That distance, however small, is the beginning of the escape. You cannot leave something you are completely merged with. The recognition that there is a room around you is the first step toward finding the door. Refusal follows recognition. The fear state generates an enormous pressure to comply, to keep checking, to keep contracting, to keep interpreting through the lens of threat. Refusal is the conscious withdrawal of that compliance, not suppression, not argument, not the pretense that the fear was never there, but a clear, deliberate choice to stop obeying its commands in this moment. Fear does not need to be defeated. It needs to be disobeyed. The authority it claims was never legitimately its. Withdrawing your compliance is not a violent act. It is a correction of a misattributed authority. Returning to source is the third movement, and it changes the quality of everything that follows. For Wattles, the source was not an abstraction. It was the thinking stuff, the creative substrate of all reality, inexhaustible, creative, responsive to conscious intention. Returning to source means reorienting the mind toward this reality, toward the abundance that underlies appearance, toward the creative potential that fear contracts but cannot permanently destroy. This return does not require perfect calm. It does not require the complete absence of fear. It requires a genuine turning of attention, even a partial one, toward what is creative and alive rather than toward what is threatened and diminishing. These three movements, recognition, refusal, return, are not a single event. They are a practice. And the turning point the next section describes is not the moment when fear is permanently defeated. It is the moment when you discover, perhaps for the first time, that escape is genuinely possible, that the room has a door, that the door opens from the inside, and that the river outside is exactly as vast as Wattles promised it was. The first thing that must stop is calling the fear state truth, not calling it false, not denying the circumstances that gave rise to it, but withdrawing the identity of truth from it. Truth is a serious designation. It means this is how things actually are. When you call the fear state truth, you are declaring that the room is the world, that the window is the whole sky, that what the contracted state perceives is the reliable final report on reality. This designation must be revoked. The fear state produces impressions. It does not produce truth. What it shows you is real within its own narrow frame, but the frame is not reality. Making decisions inside panic must stop. The moment you recognize that a major decision is being driven primarily by the need to escape anxiety, rather than by clear perception of the right course of action, that decision must be paused. Not indefinitely, not until some perfect state of certainty arrives, but long enough to ask whether the decision is coming from the creative state or the fear state. Decisions made inside panic carry the signature of panic. They serve the need to reduce the tension of the moment, not the long-term movement of creative wealth building. And they tend to close the very channels they were intended to open. Checking evidence compulsively must stop. This is not an argument against awareness. It is an argument against the ritual of monitoring driven by the hope that the numbers will say something different if you look often enough. Each compulsive check that returns the same concerning picture reinforces the fear state rather than informing it. Real awareness looks once, clearly, and then acts from what is seen. Compulsive checking looks repeatedly, not to gather information, but to manage the anxiety of not knowing. It doesn't work. The anxiety grows with each check, because checking is itself a behavior rooted in the fear state, and each repetition deepens the roots. Acting to escape terror must stop. There is a distinct quality to action, motivated primarily by the need to make the fear go away. It is hurried, overcommitted, poorly targeted, and often damages relationships and situations that required care and patience. When the motivation for action is relief from inner distress rather than advancement toward a creative intention, the action serves the fear rather than the flow. It does not open channels. It often closes them, because the desperation is visible, the overreach is real, and the people on the receiving end of that energy respond accordingly. Letting fear close gratitude must stop. Gratitude is too important to the mechanism to be surrendered to the fear state without a fight. Wattles was clear that gratitude was not simply a practice for pleasant times. It was the practice precisely for moments when the fear state was pressing hardest. Holding gratitude against the pressure of the fear state is not easy. It is one of the most demanding inner disciplines his method requires, but it is also the most powerful single act of escape available, because gratitude, genuinely felt, reorients the entire mind in a single movement. It does not require the fear to be gone. It requires only that you find something real to be grateful for, and hold it steadily against the pressure to let lack define your attention. The creative state is available to you right now, not after the circumstances improve, not after the fear subsides completely, not after some threshold of safety is reached. Right now, before any evidence of resolution, the creative state is available because it does not depend on circumstances. It depends on orientation. Wattles built his entire method on this precise understanding. The thinking stuff is always present. The source is always flowing. The creative process is always available to a mind willing to orient itself toward it. Accepting this, genuinely accepting it, rather than theoretically acknowledging it, is the pivotal act of the turning point. Gratitude is the doorway. This is not a gentle suggestion. It is the practical, operational entry point into the creative state. Find what is real and present and genuinely good in your current life. Find what has already arrived, what is already working, what is already alive in the landscape of your existence. It does not need to be large. A moment of genuine gratitude over a small, true thing is more powerful than a performance of gratitude over enormous abstractions. When you locate genuine gratitude and hold it, the mind shifts. The orientation toward abundance begins to reassert itself against the orientation toward lack. The door between the fear state and the creative state is unlocked by this movement. Definite thought restores direction when everything feels scattered and contracted. Choosing one clear intention, one specific creative direction, and holding it with genuine certainty, even briefly, begins to reconstitute the creative process. The vagueness of fear, its spreading, undirected dread, is directly challenged by the specificity of a definite thought. Something sharpens. Something that had been diffuse begins to cohere. The thinking stuff, as Wattles described it, begins to respond. Not dramatically, not with immediate material results, but with the inner movement of a mind that has found its direction again after being disoriented by the fear state. Present action restores movement. When you take one efficient, clean action in the present moment, from even a partial return to the creative state, something changes in the relationship between your inner world and the outer world. You are no longer only inside your own mind managing fear. You are moving through reality, making contact, creating the possibility of channels. The action does not need to be large. It needs to be clean and present and directed. Wattles' emphasis on the present moment was not arbitrary. The present is the only place where efficient action can occur. Fear lives in the future. The creative state lives in now. Flow returns after the state shifts. This is the promise, and the turning point requires that it be accepted before the flow is visible. The acceptance must come first. The evidence follows. This is precisely what Wattles meant by faith, not belief after evidence, but belief before it. The willingness to reorient toward the creative state, to withdraw from the fear state, to practice gratitude and definite thought and present action before anything in the outer world has changed, is the act that begins the inner shift from which outer movement eventually follows. Accepting this truth without demanding evidence first is the actual turning point. I escape fear and restore the flow. This is not a comfort statement. It is a declaration of inner position. It names the action, the escape, and it names the outcome, the restoration of flow. Between these two lies the entire Wattles method. Holding this declaration in the moments when fear is pressing hardest is not an act of pretense. It is an act of will, the conscious choice to occupy a creative position rather than surrender to the competing one. The declaration is precise. Escape is active. Flow is restored, not created from nothing but restored, which acknowledges that it was always there and that the state was what interrupted it. Fear is not my authority. This is the statement that directly revokes the false governance of the fear state. Authority is not a trivial concept in this context. Whatever you grant authority to governs your decisions, your interpretations, your actions, and ultimately your results. When fear holds authority, everything produced by your life will carry the signature of that authority. Fear authority produces fear-shaped outcomes. Revoking that authority is not a dismissal of difficulty. It is the reinstatement of the rightful governor of the creative process, which is the conscious mind oriented toward the source. I return to source. 3 words, and the most complete statement of the turning point. Not I force the flow, not I demand results, but I return, which acknowledges that the distance from source was temporary and self-created, that source has not moved, that the creative substance has not diminished, and that the return is always available. Wattles understood the spiritual dimension of this. The relationship with the thinking stuff was not maintained by circumstances. It was maintained by orientation, and orientation is a choice that remains available even in the most contracted moments of the fear state. I act from the creative state. This is the operational completion of the inner position. Not I act to escape fear. Not I act because I cannot stand the tension, but I act from the creative state, which means the action is clean, directed, efficient, present, and aligned with the creative intention. When this becomes the standard against which action is evaluated, the quality of action changes. The question before every significant move becomes, am I acting from the creative state or from the fear state? That question alone, asked seriously and answered honestly, begins to shift the pattern of behavior in a way that gradually opens channels and restores flow. Here is the actual decision. It is not a dramatic moment. It is often quiet, interior, and deeply personal. The choice is this: remain in the fear state or leave it. Staying is not the absence of a decision. Staying is a decision. Every moment you do not consciously choose to escape is a moment you have chosen, by default, to remain. The walls of the room are not forcing you to stay. They never were. The door was always there. The choice to open it is the one the fear state has been working to prevent. Because once you open it and see the river, the authority the fear state claimed over your life becomes very difficult to restore. The fear state feels protective. This is the deepest truth about why people stay. Inside the room there is a kind of grim security. The threats are known, the limitations are predictable, the walls are familiar. Stepping outside means encountering the full variability of the open landscape, the uncertainty of genuine exposure to creative living. Fear says, stay here, and at least you know what you are dealing with. The creative state makes no such promise. It offers flow, not certainty. It offers movement, not safety. And for a person who has mistaken the walls for protection, the prospect of removing them is genuinely terrifying. The creative state feels exposed. This is not a false impression. There is a real vulnerability in holding gratitude when circumstances are difficult, in thinking definitively when everything is uncertain, in acting from creative intention when the results are not guaranteed. Wattles did not promise that living in the creative state would make everything comfortable. He promised that it would restore the flow, that wealth would move through the person who held the right inner position with faith and gratitude and present action. The exposure is real. The vulnerability is real. But the river on the other side of the room is also real, and you cannot reach it from inside the walls. Freedom is what the creative state actually offers. Not comfort, not certainty, not the elimination of difficulty. Freedom. The freedom of a mind no longer imprisoned by the fear state's narrow window and contracted perception. The freedom of an attention that can see channels that were invisible before. The freedom of action that is clean and directed, rather than frantic and desperate. The freedom of a relationship to the source that the fear state was blocking. This is what you are choosing when you choose to escape. Not a guarantee, a freedom. And from that freedom, the flow of wealth can begin to move through you again in a way that the locked room could never allow. The practice begins with early identification. Before the fear state has fully consolidated for the day, before the checking has begun and the racing has accelerated, there is often a brief window in which the state can be seen for what it is. Developing the habit of noticing the signs early, the tightening in the chest, the first involuntary scan for threats, the initial contraction of attention creates the opportunity for escape before the room has fully sealed itself. Early recognition is the most efficient point of intervention because the state in its early stages has not yet built the momentum that makes it feel immovable. Name what fear is saying. Do not simply feel the vague pressure of the state. Translate it into specific sentences. What is fear actually claiming right now? Everything is about to collapse. There is not enough. That opportunity has already passed. Acting now will make things worse. Naming these claims specifically does something important. It separates them from reality and presents them as claims rather than facts. A claim can be examined, a fact cannot be questioned. The moment fear has to articulate itself in clear language, its authority begins to weaken, because clear articulation reveals the narrowness of the interpretation. After naming the claim, ask a single clarifying question. Is this source or panic? The question is not whether the fear is rational. It is whether the frame generating the fear is the creative orientation toward the thinking stuff, toward the inexhaustible supply and the creative process, or whether it is the panic orientation toward threat, scarcity, and competition. You probably already know the answer. The asking is not intellectual. It is a reality check that reintroduces the creative frame into a moment that had been monopolized by the fear frame. The question itself is an act of escape. Shift attention to genuine gratitude, not performed gratitude, not the repetition of a list, but the located recognition of something specific and real that already exists in your life and is worth acknowledging. A relationship that holds, a capacity that is genuinely yours, a moment from yesterday that carried something good. The gratitude does not need to be large or dramatic. It needs to be genuine and specific. One true thing, held consciously for even 30 seconds, is enough to begin the reorientation. The fear state and the gratitude state cannot occupy the same moment with equal force. Choose which one gets the weight of your attention. Re-enter, present action. After the state has been named, the fear has been questioned, and the gratitude has been located. Move. Take one action that is present, clean, and connected to your creative intention. Not the most important action, not the boldest move, but something real and doable that belongs to the creative life you are building. The action completes the daily practice by returning you to the world as a creator rather than as a prisoner. It converts the inner shift into an outer expression, and that expression confirms to every part of your mind that the escape has happened, that the door is open, that the room is not the world. One of the most persistent thoughts inside the fear state is the thought of being trapped. I am trapped by this situation. There is no way forward. Every direction is closed. This thought is not an observation. It is a product of the state generating it. The replacement is not a false positive. It is the accurate creative frame. I can leave the fear state. This is simply true. The state can be left. The room has a door. The replacement thought does not deny the difficulty of the situation. It reframes the nature of the imprisonment. You are not trapped by circumstances. You are temporarily inside a state. And states can be changed. When fear says everything is closing, it is describing the perceptual experience of the contracted state. Within that state, channels do feel like they are closing, because the attention that would reveal them has narrowed. The replacement thought names the actual mechanism. Channels reopen when I return to source. This is the Wattles understanding stated precisely. The channels are not being closed by the external world. They are being made invisible by the internal state. And the corrective action is the return to source, which reopens the perceptual aperture and allows the channels to become visible again. Every time this thought is practiced and the return to source follows it, the evidence for its truth accumulates. The most important replacement is also the most foundational. Fear is a state. Not fear is temporary. Not fear is manageable. Fear is a state. This replacement challenges the most deeply embedded misunderstanding, which is that fear is truth. A state is something you are currently in. Truth is something about reality itself. These are not the same category. When the mind clearly grasps that fear is a state, it simultaneously grasps that the state can be changed, that it does not need to be obeyed as truth, and that its perceptions are colored by its own architecture rather than by the objective nature of things. The simplicity of this replacement is deceptive. Fully absorbed, it is one of the most liberating intellectual shifts a person can make. Thought discipline is not the constant aggressive suppression of fearful thoughts. That approach is exhausting and ultimately counterproductive. Thought discipline, as Wattles understood it, is the consistent practice of choosing which thoughts to develop, to hold, to return to, and to build upon. Fearful thoughts will arise. They do not need to be fought, they need to be not developed. The moment you notice a fear thought beginning to build its architecture, the act of choosing a different thought, not in anger toward the first one, but in clear preference for the second, is the act of thought discipline. Over time, the creative thoughts become more habitual simply because they have been practiced more consistently. The quality of thought discipline, its steadiness and depth, determines the quality of the creative process. Wattles was not offering this as an optional enhancement. He was describing the actual mechanism. A mind that can hold a definite creative thought with clarity and consistency, replacing the fear state thoughts that compete for the same ground, is a mind that is actively creating, not wishing, not hoping, creating. The thinking stuff responds to thought held in this way, and the results, though they may arrive through channels that were not predicted, are real, material, and cumulative. Panic-possessed action is a specific recognizable state. Your movements feel rushed. Your words come out harder than you intended. You make commitments you have not thought through. You pursue several directions simultaneously and bring insufficient attention to any of them. This is action that was forced into being by the need to escape inner discomfort, rather than by clear creative intention. When you catch yourself in this state, mid-action, the appropriate response is not shame. It is a pause. The pause is not inaction. It is the most important action available in that moment. Stopping, even briefly, before the next step of a decision, before the next message is sent, before the next commitment is made, creates the space in which the state can be assessed. Is this action coming from clarity or from panic? Is this movement serving a creative intention or escaping a feeling? The pause does not need to be long. 3 conscious breaths, a moment of deliberate attention on what is present rather than what is feared. The pause is the re-entry point between the fear state and the creative state. From the pause, restore the definite thought. What is the actual creative intention behind this action? What are you genuinely building, genuinely moving toward, genuinely creating? Not the anxiety goal of making the fear stop, but the creative goal of bringing something specific and valued into your life. Hold that thought for a moment, clearly and genuinely. Let it become the frame for the action you are about to take. When action is aligned with a definite creative thought, it changes quality. It becomes something the nervous system can support, rather than merely endure. Then take one efficient action. 1. Not 10 to compensate for the delay. Not a sweeping gesture to make up for lost time. One clean, present, fully given action that moves toward the creative intention. Wattles was emphatic about the quality of efficiency because he understood that scattered action, even at high volume, did not carry the creative force of a single action given completely in the present moment. Efficient does not mean fast, it means full. Every resource brought to bear on one movement with complete presence, without the divided attention of someone who is simultaneously managing their fear. Let the action be clean. This is the final and perhaps most easily overlooked element. A clean action is one that has no contamination of desperation in it. The recipient of a clean action experiences someone who is giving genuinely rather than grasping urgently. Clean actions open channels. Desperate actions close them. The way you give, offer, move, and create communicates your state to the world more accurately than your words do. A clean action performed from even a partial return to the creative state carries more creative force than 100 frantic actions performed inside the fear state. Fear will return. This is not a sign that the practice has failed. It is simply the nature of deeply established patterns. The fear state was not built in a single afternoon, and it will not be permanently dissolved in one. There will be days when the escape that felt complete yesterday has to be made again today. There will be moments when an unexpected piece of information, a bill, a setback, a conversation that did not go the way you hoped, pulls you back inside the room. Expecting this without being defeated by it is a crucial element of the practice. When fear returns, the response is the same: escape again. Not with frustration at having to escape again, not with discouragement that it came back. Escape again, as many times as necessary, with the same clarity and the same commitment as the first time. Each escape, even when it feels like a repetition, is not a return to zero. It is a deepening of the practice. The person who has escaped the fear state 50 times understands something about the nature of the room and the nature of the river that the person who has escaped it once cannot fully access. Repetition is not failure. Repetition is mastery in the process of forming. Gratitude is the return mechanism every time. When fear has reasserted itself and the room feels like the world again, find one genuine thing to be grateful for. It will feel harder today than it did yesterday. Do it anyway. The gratitude does not need to feel large or inspired. It needs to be genuine and specific. One true acknowledgement of one real good in the present moment. That acknowledgement, held for even a short time, begins to loosen the grip of the re-entered fear state. Gratitude is never more important than when it is hardest to access. Wattles built his method on this exact understanding. Return to present action. When gratitude has shifted the orientation even slightly, move. Take one present action. Let the action be small if necessary. Small actions taken repeatedly from the creative state build something real over time. They accumulate. They create contact with the world. They generate the evidence, slowly and honestly, that the locked room was not the world. Each time you escape, re-enter gratitude, take action, and observe the world responding even slightly to that shift. The inner authority of the creative state grows. And as it grows, the fear state's claims to authority become progressively harder to sustain. Be generous with yourself in this process. The instruction to not shame yourself for needing to escape repeatedly is not a concession to weakness. It is an accurate understanding of how the creative law actually operates in a human life. Wattles described the certain way as something you practice, not something you achieve once and maintain automatically. The practice includes the return. It includes the repetition. It includes the willingness to begin again after the fear has come back. Shame about needing to begin again is itself a product of the fear state. It belongs to the same contracted orientation that you are working to leave. Meet the repetition with the same creative generosity that Wattles brought to his teaching. Consider someone who has been watching their financial situation with increasing alarm. The bills are real. The account is low. Every morning begins with a check that confirms the concern, and every evening ends with the same calculation running in the background of whatever else they are trying to do. The fear state has become the constant environment. Opportunities that friends mention feel like mockery rather than genuine possibilities. The energy to pursue anything is consistently undermined by the weight of what feels like an unavoidable reckoning approaching. From inside the room, this is the world. At some point, this person encounters the recognition, not necessarily through a dramatic moment, but through a quiet clarity. This is the fear state, not the truth, a state. The window is not the world. They name what the fear is saying. Everything is closing, there is not enough time, acting will make it worse. And they ask the question, is this source or panic? The answer arrives honestly. This is panic. This is the locked room showing them its particular narrow view of the sky. They shift to gratitude, one real thing, a specific capacity they have, genuinely theirs, that has carried them before and is still present. A relationship that has held through previous difficulties. Something that exists now in this moment that is genuinely good. They hold it, not for long, but genuinely. And something in the orientation of the mind shifts, slightly, verifiably. The room does not disappear, but it feels less total. The window is still there, but the walls feel less like reality and more like walls. From that shifted state, a channel that was previously invisible becomes visible. Not through magic, through perception restored. A conversation they had 2 weeks ago that at the time seemed tangential suddenly connects to a specific capacity they have. A person in their life who could be asked directly in a clean way for something specific and useful. They take the action. One efficient, present, clean action, not frantic, not desperate, directed. And the response, when it comes, confirms what Wattles' method always reveals. The river was there. It was always there. What changed was not the river. What changed was that the person left the room. Fear is a state. This is the fundamental correction at the center of everything Wattles taught about wealth and the creative process. It is not a truth about your circumstances. It is not an accurate report on the permanent condition of your supply. It is a state you enter, one that changes your perception, contracts your attention, breaks your gratitude, corrupts your action, and closes the channels through which wealth was already moving. The fear state is not your enemy in the sense that it must be destroyed. It is a room, and rooms can be left. The state closes channels. This is the mechanism behind the experience every person in financial fear knows intimately. The sense that everything is shutting down, that doors are closing, that options are narrowing, that the world has fewer openings than it did. These impressions are real within the fear state's perceptual frame, but they are produced by the state, not by reality. The channels are not actually closing. The person's ability to see and respond to them is, and that ability is restored, not by changing the circumstances, but by changing the state. Escape restores flow. The river of creative substance, of formless supply, of the wealth described by Wattles as available to anyone operating in the certain way, does not stop moving when fear enters. It continues its movement through the open landscape, available to any consciousness that is oriented toward it. Escape from the fear state is the act of re-entering that landscape. It is not the creation of a new river. It is the return to a river that was always there, waiting with the same inexhaustible creative force that Wattles described as the nature of the thinking stuff itself. These three movements, recognizing the state, understanding its effect, and escaping into the creative orientation, are the entire arc of the method in its compressed form. Everything else in this teaching has been an elaboration of these three movements, a deepening of their meaning, a practical guide to their application, and a removal of the misunderstandings that would prevent them from being practiced. The law is simple, the application is daily, and the power it carries, once lived rather than merely understood, is entirely consistent with what Wattles promised when he described the certain way. The old life inside the fear state has a recognizable shape. Morning begins with contraction. Attention goes immediately to what is threatened. Decisions are made to escape the anxiety rather than to advance the creative intention. Gratitude is absent not from hardness of heart, but because the state makes genuine orientation toward abundance structurally impossible. Action is frantic or paralyzed, channels are invisible, and the overall sense is of living inside a narrowing, of a world that is slowly, persistently pressing in. The person does not experience themselves as imprisoned, they experience themselves as realistic. The new life in the creative state has a different shape. It is not the absence of difficulty, it is a different relationship to difficulty. Morning begins with the choice of orientation. The circumstances may be identical, but the attention moves first to what is real and present and genuinely good, before it moves to what is threatened. Decisions are held briefly against the question of which state they are emerging from. Gratitude is practiced as a discipline because its function in the creative process is understood. Action is clean, present, directed. Channels that were invisible begin to reveal themselves because the aperture of attention is no longer contracted by the state. The old mind obeys panic. Every command the fear state issues, check again, contract, hoard, compare, interpret through threat, is followed without question because the old mind has granted the fear state the authority of truth. The new mind does not eliminate fear, but it refuses fear's authority. When the fear state speaks, the new mind hears it as a state speaking, not truth reporting, and makes the choice about whether to comply. This single shift, from automatic obedience to conscious authority, changes everything about how life is navigated. The new mind leaves the room. Not once, not dramatically, not as a permanent departure after a single heroic moment, but repeatedly, practically, and with increasing ease. The room will appear again. The fear state reassembles. The new mind's response is the practiced one. Recognition, refusal, return. The door opens again. The river becomes visible again. The creative process resumes again. Each time the room is left, the memory of the river grows stronger, and the room's authority over the mind grows correspondingly weaker. This is the transformation Wattles was describing. Not a change in circumstances, a change in the mind that meets circumstances. Wealth does not require your fear in order to move. This sounds obvious when stated plainly, but it contradicts a deeply held belief that many people carry without examining. The belief is this: that vigilance about the negative, sustained awareness of what could go wrong, the emotional weight of taking the situation seriously, these things are part of the responsible management of wealth. That relaxing the fear is relaxing the grip on what matters. Wattles showed that this belief is not only incorrect but actively counterproductive. Fear does not produce the conditions under which wealth moves. It produces the conditions under which wealth cannot move. Fear does not protect flow. It does not guard the supply. It does not improve the quality of decisions or the accuracy of perception. What it does is narrow, contract, and close. It takes a person who was operating from a creative state that had genuine access to the river of supply and places them in a room with a small window. The protection fear claims to offer is the protection of the closed room, which is no protection at all and no wealth at all. The supply that the fear state protects the person from losing is always smaller than the supply the creative state would have opened the person to receiving. The flow returns when the state returns to source. This is the final law, compressed into one sentence. Source is not depleted. The thinking stuff is not exhausted. The creative process has not been permanently interrupted. The channels that carried supply before can carry supply again. Everything that made flow possible before is still in place. What was interrupted was not the river. What was interrupted was the relationship between the person and the river. And that relationship is restored by the one thing the fear state cannot provide, and the creative state always offers: a genuine return to the source that underlies all supply, all creation, and all wealth. There is a statement waiting to be made, not a wish, not an aspiration, a declaration of inner position that names exactly where you are choosing to stand in relation to the fear state and in relation to the flow of creative wealth. Declarations matter in this framework because they are not merely words. They are the conscious mind stating its orientation to the thinking stuff, confirming its direction, and withdrawing its compliance from the governing authority of fear. Wattles built his entire method on the premise that conscious orientation produces creative movement. A declaration is orientation made explicit. Speak it now if you are ready. Speak it not as the distant future version of yourself who has completely dissolved the fear, but as the person you are right now, standing at the door of the locked room with your hand on the handle, choosing to open it. The declaration is not for perfect moments. It is for this moment, with the fear still present, with the circumstances unchanged, with the river not yet visible, and with the creative state being chosen regardless. That choice, made here, made now, is the turning point. And the turning point is where the flow begins to move. Say these words, not quietly, not tentatively, but with the full weight of someone who has understood what the fear state costs and has made the conscious decision to leave it. I escape fear and restore the flow. Let those words land in the part of you that has been inside the room, the part that has been watching through the small window and believing that the narrow view was the whole world. The escape is not a future event. The declaration is the escape. You are choosing your state right now, and the state you choose determines everything that follows. This declaration is the exact inversion of the fear state's claim. The fear state says, stay, contract, obey the threat. The declaration says, I escape. The fear state says, supply is blocked and movement is impossible. The declaration says, I restore the flow. Every word in those 7 syllables is the creative state asserting its authority over the competing consciousness that fear installed. Hold the declaration. Let it be the inner position from which this day is navigated. The thinking stuff is responsive. Your orientation matters. Choose the creative state and speak it with that understanding. I escape fear and restore the flow. Write it down if you need to see it. Return to it when the fear state reassembles. Use it as the exact instrument Wattles' method always required. A clear, definite, conscious thought held with genuine intention against the pressure of appearances. It is not a magic phrase. It is a choice made conscious. And conscious choices, made repeatedly in the direction of the creative state, are the mechanism through which the river of supply becomes accessible to a life that had been locked in the fear state's contracted room. If this teaching has reached something real in you, if the mechanism Wattles described has begun to clarify the experience you have been living inside without having the language for it, there is more. This channel continues to explore his complete method. Fear, faith, gratitude, wealth flow, the thinking stuff, the certain way, and every dimension of the creative process he spent his life articulating. Subscribe, and the next teaching will find you. Each new video on this channel is another room left, another door opened, another step toward the river that Wattles described, and that is genuinely available to every person willing to operate from the creative state. Stay in this practice. Let the channel be part of the daily return to source. From this point forward, you will not call fear truth. You have seen it clearly enough now to name it for what it is. A state, a room, a narrow window that shows a strip of sky and calls it the whole universe. When fear speaks in the language of certainty, you will hear a state speaking. When it makes its claims about what is closed and what is blocked and what cannot move, you will remember the river flowing outside the room, unchanged by the walls that were making it invisible. Fear does not get the authority of truth in your life. The creative state does. When the room closes around you again, and it may, you will return to source. You will find the one genuine thing that gratitude can hold. You will take one clean action from the present moment. You will restore the definite thought. You will practice the escape with the same commitment and the same clarity every time it is required, knowing that each return to the creative state is the actual movement of the Wattles method, not the aftermath of it. The practice is the method. The return is the power. The river does not ask how many times you needed to escape in order to reach it. Escape fear, and the flow can move again. This is the ancient promise that Wattles articulated, and this teaching has unfolded. The thinking stuff is there. The source is there. The river is there. The only thing standing between you and the flow is the state you are living inside. Change the state. Leave the room. Step into the open landscape where the creative current is still moving, where it has always been moving, where it will continue to move regardless of how long the room held you. The door is open. The declaration has been made. The escape is yours.